Okay, so I know it's been a while since my last Big Finish video, and this is volume 4 in a series, so let's have a little recap. The Doom Coalition saga so far. So there's this insane Time Lord called the 11 with multiple incarnations in one body who's involved in this massive conspiracy with this lady with psychic powers called the Sonomancer and a Time Lord called Padrak who want to destroy everything in the universe because the Time Lords have predicted the total destruction of Gallifrey in all possible timelines owing to something called a Time War. That sounds interesting. I wonder what that is. And the Doctor basically has to stop Padrak, the Sonomancer and the 11, but by stopping them, he essentially ensures Gallifrey's eventual destruction. This is entirely necessary because otherwise all of that stuff he said in New Who about it being his fault that the Time Lords are all dead won't make any sense, and everything has to be in its rightful place because continuity is a hungry beast and it needs to be fed 80 quid's worth of box sets, or presumably it will break out of its cage and go on a rampage and thousands of people will die as a result. Anyway, so Doom Coalition 4 starts with the restrained and gloomy ship in a bottle, and it's the type of Big Finish concept that I love, although I don't in this case because it's a lot lower in the experimental capacity than other plays of this sort. It's a three-hander, and Ship in a Bottle picks up where the last box set left off, with the Doctor, Liv and Helen stuck on a ship hurtling through the vortex with no possible way out in sight. It's a very straightforward piece of the Doctor, Liv and Helen using a bizarre setup of activating literal sails to fly the spaceship through the nothingness. It's mostly composed of technobabble and resolving into character drama, and where the Doctor's relationship with his current companion stands at this point. But I suppose the big problem that I had with it was that Doom Coalition 3 was so huge, so calamitous, and filled with dramatic twists and turns that it pretty much engulfs the admittedly interesting simple idea of the Doctor and friends try and get themselves out of a sticky situation. It's alright, just if you're as excited to hear Ship in a Bottle as I was when I first heard that premise, just know before going in that its hands kind of been forced by the stakes and the context that it's sat inside. Next up we got Songs of Love, which ditches the Doctor for the most part and focuses on River, who's shown up on Gallifrey where Padrak is presenting his horrifying solution to the oncoming issue that's been foreseen of Gallifrey being wiped out, with the occasional intervening scenes picking up where Liv and Helen were left floating in space at the end of Ship in a Bottle. Now, I really enjoyed Songs of Love, I really did. It's pretty much just more of the massive and interesting web of scandal and political conspiracy that we saw at the end of Doom Coalition 3. As I said when I jabbered about that one, I like that Big Finish have given the typically stuffy and pretentious political environment of Gallifrey something big and cataclysmic to deal with. And as I've mentioned before, it feels highly appropriate to do some fleshing out of the Time War stories now, given the current global political psychodrama unfolding in the real world. It's just really interesting to actually hear Doctor Who actually execute something like this, a huge, grandiose political space opera with a large scope. The franchise has always differentiated itself from lots of space operas, like Babylon 5 for example, by its small stories that are part of a bigger picture. And while this is an interesting experiment, and this isn't really part of the Time War as such, it's a little civil war that takes place just before it, this box set did kinda remind me of a bit of a tricky issue to get over with regard to just the idea of even doing the Time War at all, as we lead up to that conspicuously titled series of box sets. The Time War's always been this huge, shapeless, formless concept full of inconceivable horrors. In New Who, they always used to write it very much in the Lovecraftian vein of, "Oh my god, this thing was so horrible and unspeakably terrifying that it's beyond words and beyond imagination." You know, the 10th Doctor will jabber long streams of nonsense-sounding things like, "I saw the fall of Space Planeteer, and the jaws of the Nightmare Child, and the bridal beast of Beth Chaturhara-Zed, and the sponge monsters of the planet dishwashing liquid," or something. You know, the Time War always worked on the principle of what you don't see and what's left up to the imagination is more terrifying. And totally fleshing out the Time War like they've kind of set up that they're about to do in this one could be seen to be undermining that. I did say could there, I'm still undecided on whether it does or not. That said, I have been finding the build up to it incredibly engaging, and the way that Doom Coalition 4 uses the elements that it's built up over the course of the saga makes a lot of sense, and it's clear that a lot of forethought has gone into leading us into the Time War. I really enjoyed River in Songs of Love. She does feel more well-rounded now, and the characterisation of her is a lot more believable here than it was in New Who Season 6 and 7. In this, she actually does feel like the duplicitous double agent that she was always supposed to be. You're never quite sure where you stand with her and whether you can totally trust her, and this status feels like it's been earned now because the stakes are so high, and the plot's been so intricately woven from loose threads and bits and pieces of ideas from New Who. Although if we get too bogged down in the future in trying to make sense of stuff like Wedding of River Song, as Songs of Love does here, it might end up doing a bit more harm than good to the overall quality of Big Finish's output as a whole. Next up we got Side of the Angels, and it pretty much sees Big Finish hollowing out the dead carcass of Angels Take Manhattan and stuffing it with something a bit meatier than before. And holy Christ, my metaphors are becoming more psychotic with every fucking video. Jesus, what the hell is wrong with me? Anyway, the Doctor, Liv and Helen show up in New York, where a new incarnation of the meddling monk, who's now mayor, is renovating the city to turn it into a recreation of Gallifrey, with the added bonus of it being full of weeping angels. Given that this one's got enemy Time Lords, the Angels, a massive sprawling setting, internal politics, external politics, and the entire arc of these box sets to deal with, you know, being the penultimate story and all, this could have been a complete mess, but strangely, everything seems to fall into place somehow. And the Angels turn out to be a surprisingly efficient villain for this type of story, purely by virtue of the reason that you never expected them to work so well in an audio format. Their silence, their ability to communicate through people, and their shadowy background presence makes them more sinister and all the more suited to the dubious political machinations of the Doom Coalition saga as a whole. These box sets have thrived on making you second guess whose side all of the key players are on, and with a fantastic script, some beautiful imagery, and the horrifying methods that the Angels employ on either their own or others' behalfs, Side of the Angels is pretty damn solid and easily a series highlight. We finish up with Stop the Clock, which, given the last instalment of the last saga is literally called Dark Eyes, Eye of Darkness, it seems that giving a saga's finale a stupid name is becoming a tradition now. If either Matt Fitton or John Dorney are listening, by the way, please, please, please make the last instalment of the last Time War box set be called The Time War, The War of Time. In fact, I was kind of disappointed that this one wasn't called Doom Coalition, Coalition of Doom. But Stop the Clock is still pretty silly. Stop the Clock is basically 60 minutes of technobabble again. It's an hour on Gallifrey where Padrak and the Sonomancer are orchestrating this whole destroy everything outside of Gallifrey plot, while the Doctor is masquerading as the 11 again. And there's this pretty awesome sequence where the 11 gets captured by the rebel Gallifreyans outside the Citadel, which includes Mark Bonnar's best performance by far. I love just how truly dangerous this character feels. Even if the bad guy getting captured and manipulating his way out of seemingly being incapacitated is an old standard, and it has been particularly overused in massive nerd franchises recently, it is an old standard for a reason, and it is highly engaging. However, I'd be lying if I said that the conclusion of Stop the Clock isn't pretty damn disappointing. The story annoyingly stumbles right at the very, very last hurdle, as Padrak's massive complex plan to eliminate the threat of Gallifrey's destruction in the oncoming Time War that's been drawn together over 4 box sets now is foiled by a lover's tiff between Padrak and the Sonomancer. He never really loved her. He just pretended that he did so she would end up becoming the Sonomancer and help him destroy the universe. Okay, Big Finish. Guys, I love you guys quite a lot, and so do lots of people, which probably had a lot to do with why this hasn't been nearly as controversial among avid listeners. But if New Who did something like that, you would never fucking hear the end of it. Oh yeah, and the coda kind of totally ruins the thing that I liked most about the Red Lady, the anonymity of the antagonist. I mean, I get the compulsion to draw all the events of the box sets together into something meaningful, as almost all of the events have ended up connected in some way, but the Red Lady's ambiguity was what I liked so much about it, and I just felt that it was a bit of a letdown to address it in this one. It was totally needless. I mean, I mostly treated Red Lady as an interesting introductory episode for Helen, rather than just another piece of the puzzle. I mean, I suppose I do kind of admire the cohesion of the Doom Coalition box sets. Dark Eyes had a lot of really quite obvious problems behind the scenes, and it ended up kind of muddled, meandering, and full of loose threads, and it's a lot more fragmented. With Doom Coalition, on the other hand, while I couldn't see much of a direction for a while, the way in which the stories end up being knitted together is a lot tighter than with the Dark Eyes saga. I enjoyed the experience while it lasted, and I feel I got my money's worth, just I found that final destination that I got to was a bit of a damp squib. Well, a massive damp squib. Okay, yes, if I was talking about Nuhu here, I would probably call it a damp squib so fucking enormous that it could probably give Stephen Moffat's massive brain a run for its money. Again, I am fucking biased in Big Finish's favour. You should know this by now.